When I was Muslim, I was taught that Muhammad fulfilled prophecies from the Quran, but nobody told me that Jesus fulfilled prophecies from the Torah, literally word for word, that couldn't possibly have been written about anything else. Over 300 of them to be exact. Isaiah 7:14 says, "Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel," which means God with us. This was written 700 years before the virgin birth of Jesus. And who was Jesus? A man who was God, living among us, born to a virgin. Then, just 2 chapters later in Isaiah 9:6, it says, "For to us a child is born, and he will be called Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace." A child called Mighty God and Everlasting Father. And again, this was written 700 years before Jesus. And this is confirmed by the Dead Sea Scrolls, which date all the way back to 200 BC, which is 200 years before Jesus. And this isn't just a modern interpretation, because even Matthew 1:23 literally confirms that, yes, Isaiah 7:14 was indeed about Jesus. If this doesn't convince you that Jesus is God, then I don't know what will. As Christians, I think that we need to be sharing these prophecies more, including the historical evidence that these prophecies were written several centuries beforehand. And modern science confirms this. Because yes, blessed are those who believe without seeing, as John 20:29 says, but God also gave us clear, tangible evidence, and we should be putting that to use. Because the reality is that there are many people who are like Thomas, and I feel like these prophecies can be used to reach them. Because I've talked to many Muslims and Christians who have never heard of any of these prophecies, and they're way too mind-blowing not to share. So for that reason, I'm going to be starting a series on prophecies that Jesus fulfilled from the Torah. But first, let's go over the prophecies that Muhammad supposedly fulfilled. They include the victory of the Romans or the Byzantines over the Persians, which to me just sounds similar to predicting which football team is going to win. Muslims conquering Persia and Rome, and Muslims conquering Jerusalem. Well, it's not surprising that they would conquer other lands, considering that the religion has always been focused on military conquest from the very beginning. Also, none of these prophecies were made several centuries before they actually happened. These things ended up happening within the same decade. Now compare that to the virgin birth of a man who would be called Mighty God 700 years before it actually happened. That is insanely specific and could not be foreseen by anyone. Now, a common rebuttal you'll hear for Isaiah 7:14 is that the Hebrew word Alma means young woman of marriageable age, not strictly virgin. Which is true, however, we also have the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Torah, dated 3rd to 2nd century BC, and it translated the word from Alma to Parthenos, which is used most often for virgin. Now in the Septuagint, Parthenos is used most often for Betula, which is the explicit Hebrew word for virgin, but it was also used twice for Alma, once in Genesis 24:43 and once in Isaiah 7:14. The translators were Jewish scholars working for Hellenistic Jewish communities, aiming to make the Hebrew scriptures more accessible in Greek. There was no incentive for these scholars to purposely change the word, given that this verse was written 200 years before Jesus or Christianity. They chose to use that word based on their scholarly Jewish knowledge. So yeah, that rebuttal falls apart in my opinion. Stick around for more biblical prophecies because they're going to blow your mind even more.